Labour are fighting an uphill battle ahead of this week's elections.
Birmingham City Council has declared a major incident as rubbish continues to pile up on the streets due to a strike by refuse workers.
Keir Starmer pledged to take the brakes off Britain by tearing up planning restrictions to build 1.5 million new homes.
Stopping the boats, smashing the gangs, as evident this weekend in Dover, it's all proving rather difficult.
Local elections are a litmus test for a governing party and a nexus of local and national issues for voters. And Labour and Reform are neck and neck in national voting intention polls. While Reform was once confident they could win big in May 1st's elections, in recent days party activists have started rowing back. Isabel Oakeshott, wife of Reform MP Richard Tice, took to Twitter to manage expectations ahead of the Runcorn by-election. She wrote, "Reality check. Runcorn and Helsby is one of Labour's safest seats. Yes, Reform UK is on a roll, but UK Labour is working very hard. All to play for, but for Nigel Farage there would be no shame in not winning this one." The Runcorn and Helsby by-election is taking place on the same day as the 23 local elections that have not been postponed by Labour's local government restructure. The by-election was triggered following the resignation of once Labour MP Mike Amesbury, who received a suspended sentence for punching a constituent. It should be a Labour-safe seat, but locals I spoke to were deeply unhappy with the series of unpopular policies that Labour have enacted since forming a government, from cutting winter fuel allowance to refusing to reverse the two-child benefit cap. Here's what they had to say.
I think Reform should take over.
Why do you think that?
I think they've got better ideas. They're talking more common sense. This government's making a right mess of things, and I think we should look at Reform for the future to put this country right.
Do you agree with that?
Totally, exactly, totally everything that Derek said. I think we need to have a fresh start again, and I think Reform's going to be the one to do it.
Did you guys vote for Reform or Mike Amesbury at the last general election?
Yeah, Reform.
I think probably Reform might well win that, and I think the politics of the day probably need a bit of a shake-up, really.
Why do you think Reform would win here?
Well, it's just the sense I have of people being ready for some change, and although, as I said earlier, he's been a good MP, I think there's a stirring about to have a change.
Would you be voting for that change?
I probably would, actually, yes. So I'd probably be voting Reform, I think.
It all depends who it is, but I would vote Reform.
Why is that?
Because Mike Ainsley's not Labour candidate.
So you're only voting for Labour here because it was Mike Amesbury?
Yeah, and he did things for the community, which the government's not doing anything for the community, are they?
Do you think that Reform could win in this constituency?
I hope so. But if Mike Ainsley was here, no.
And here's what the Reform candidate in Runcorn and Helsby, Sarah Pochin, had to say to PoliticsJOE's Ava Santina when she visited for the campaign launch.
If you were to be elected, would you campaign against the new PIP cuts?
Well, I think that's quite a national issue.
Yeah,
there's no doubt about it that there are people abusing the system. And I think that a lot of work needs to be done to stop that abuse. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be people that really do need help and do need those payments. And of course, what I think's happened over years and over successive governments is that it probably has become too easy to abuse the system. And I think that's what upsets people who are taxpayers, who are funding this, but who want to be reassured that the money is going to the people that really need it.
Labour are right.
I think it's something that needs looking at.
Will Labour deliver? And even if they do, as they say, cut the welfare bill by $5 billion. Well, given that it's due to increase from $70 billion to $100 billion between now and 2030, that isn't much of a saving. Do you know, I'll tell you where we stand really on all of this. I met 4 lads in the pub the other night, all early 20s, came out to have a chat. I said, what do you do? One was a welder, one was a carpenter. They all work together on construction sites. The sort of people whose alarms go off at 5 o'clock in the morning, drive around the country and work damned hard. And they'd all known each other from school days. And one of them said, he said, we are trying hard, we're getting on. He said, but there's 2 or 3 people in our class from school who've never had a job, never worked, never tried. He said, they've all got a couple of kids. He said, we're working the way we are to fund their lifestyles. And I just want to make this one point really clear. We are on the side of working people, and they are getting very, very disillusioned with the world as they see it. And when it comes to disability benefits of all kinds, just look at where we are and compare it to all of our neighbours, and something's gone fundamentally wrong since the pandemic.
Labour's candidate Karen Shore is running on a similar platform to Poachin of closing the local asylum hotel. Immigration is a key local and national election issue that the Conservatives are seen by many to have lost control of. And it's the Conservatives with the most to lose during the local elections, as they currently hold almost 2/3 of the seats up for grabs. Under the last Conservative government, small boat crossings counted for tens of thousands of arrivals to the UK per year, despite Rishi Sunak's flagship immigration policy to stop the boats. On a local level, it led to the use of hotels across the country to house asylum seekers before their claims were evaluated by the Home Office. And a recent list of local authorities shared by Serco, a company previously contracted by governments to provide asylum accommodation, shows the extent to which immigration has become a local issue for many people across the country. While Kemi Badenoch has spent much of her time as leader of the opposition on culture war issues, it's left space for both Reform and Labour to be seen as the party that will tackle immigration. The government's incoming white paper on the issue is set to contain a major crackdown on immigration, in an attempt some see to stave off some of the threat from reform. Meanwhile, an event in Dover last week, Farage promised a minister for deportations, and taking a leaf out of Trump's playbook, said this:
"We will bring a total end to all asylum claims from people who've come here on travel visas or who are overseas students. We will demand the deportation of all foreign criminals. And for those who come to Britain and who are granted citizenship, that will be regarded as a legally binding contract, just as it is in Australia and elsewhere."
However, if there's going to be any fallout from the suspension of MP Rupert Lowe from the party following accusations of bullying from Lowe's office and Lowe alleging a witch hunt against him, is yet to be seen. Reform UK is fielding the most candidates at the local elections of any party. Farage claims to have increased the vetting of candidates in an attempt to professionalise the party. This follows a number of controversies surrounding general election candidates, like Ian Gribbin, the party's then candidate in Bexhill and Battle, who had to apologise for claiming the country would be far better if it had taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality. But Mark Broadhurst, who shared a post appearing to claim Hitler would have been a legend if he had targeted Muslims, made it through local elections vetting for the party to stand in Doncaster. Put in charge of candidate selection for this week's local elections was Jack Aaron, a former general election candidate for the party. He once said Hitler was brilliant and claimed Vladimir Putin's use of force in Ukraine was legitimate. May 1st will also see elections held for 4 Metro mayors. Metro mayors like Andy Burnham in Manchester are given devolved powers and are responsible for the development of a whole city region. The Green candidate is currently projected to win the mayoralty of West of England, ousting the incumbent Labour mayor, while the mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is expected to return to the Conservatives after being held by Labour since 2021. Reform candidates are expected to win the first ever mayoral elections in Hull and East Yorkshire and Greater Lincolnshire. Former Conservative MP Andrea Jenkins is the Reform candidate in the latter, running on a ticket of protecting farmland, not covering it in solar panels and pylons. It's not the first time Reform have sought farmers' votes, as Nigel Farage became a loud voice in the rally against Labour's changes to inheritance tax. Alongside this offer to voters, when Nigel Farage entered Arena Birmingham on a JCB in March to launch Reform's local election campaign, he promised to launch a British version of Elon Musk's Doge to crack down on what he deems to be wasteful council spending. Meanwhile, factions of the Green Party are seeking to position themselves as the left-wing alternative to Reform at local elections for voters dissatisfied with Conservatives and Labour. Greens organisers are seeking to highlight the fact that they're the only party to formally endorse a wealth tax. Here's what their local election lead Steve Jackson said to me when I followed Green councillor Laura Eadie in Dartford on the campaign trail.
Conservatives typically have a base. People thought that they had something to offer, and over 15 years of austerity, scandal, lies, corruption, people finally realising that the Conservative Party don't have their best interests at heart. Unfortunately, there's a gang of grifters that have stepped into that void. Reform UK. A lot of old Tory voters are looking at Reform because they think it's the answer, and Reform are appealing to new people who are just sick of the establishment parties. I think what it says about the area is that it's somewhere that's been left behind, somewhere that people feel like they're not listened to, they're disenfranchised, they don't feel they've got a voice, they don't feel like things can get better, and that's why they're looking to shake up the political system. People don't know what Reform UK's policies are. YouGov have done polling of 4,000 Reform voters who voted for Reform in the general election. 70% of them believe in public ownership. 70% of them believe that billionaires get too much money. People don't actually know what Reform UK stands for, what Farage stands for. He wants to privatise the NHS. He wants to slash our benefits. People aren't voting for Reform because they know about the policies. Because they don't know about the policies, and if they did know about the policies, they wouldn't be voting for Reform, they'd be voting Green.
But during a housing crisis, the Greens' image as NIMBYs, consisting of councillors that block building projects, could play poorly amongst many of their young voters. While facing threats from the left and right, Labour candidates will also face the public during a bin strike in Labour-run Birmingham that's entering its 6th week. The party isn't giving up its council seats without a fight, though. Over the past week, stories including that the Tory mayoral candidate for Peterborough, Paul Bristow, may only be pretending to live in the authority, and that Kemi Badenoch wore a dress made in China while saying we should buy British, have made their way into the press. Labour has been pushing hard the idea that the Conservatives could enter into a pact with Reform at the next general election. The UK Labour Party posted that the Tories are plotting a grubby backroom deal with Nigel Farage. Kemi Badenoch has been forced to discuss the possibility of the Conservatives forming local pacts with Reform in town halls, but took to the Sunday broadcast round to deny a coalition following a general election.
Will you forbid your councillors to go into a coalition with Reform?
OK, so I want to be extremely clear because people have often been confused by this. I am not going into any coalition whatsoever with Nigel Farage or Reform at national level. I've been very
under
clear
any
about
circumstances.
That. I've said, read my lips, Trevor. I am not going into coalition with Nigel Farage.
Under any circumstances.
At local level.
Under any circumstances.
I will repeat myself. I am not going into any coalition with Nigel Farage. At local level, it's different. In the national election, you can rerun the election. At local level, you can't. So there might be no overall control. And what I've said to our councillors, I trust these people. They're very smart. They've been doing this for decades, is that you have to do what is right for your local area.
Conservative Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchin told the BBC that if the number of Tory and Reform MPs create a significant majority, then obviously there's going to have to be a conversation to form a coalition or some sort of pact. Of course, we won't know the impact of Labour's campaign until the votes are counted on Friday. As Reform lures voters from the centre-right and the Greens gain traction on the left, local elections could usher in the biggest electoral shake-up in decades. Polling expert Sir John Curtis said, "The conditions are there for the biggest challenge to the political conventions of British politics since the 1920s. The consequences of which will be increased panic in both Labour and the Conservatives as they struggle to figure out how to win back voters." So could a turquoise wave be about to sweep across England's councils?